20 followers.
Hey, you changed your Twitter handle. That's
no, I know.
Your call, man.
It's an uphill battle. I know.
All right, for those watching live, here's the countdown to the audio portion of the show. In 5, 4, 3, 2. Wait a minute. Okay, let's try that again. In 5, 4, 3, 2. Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of DSLR Film Noob Podcast. Devin joins me today to discuss all kinds of stuff. We've got remotes, we've got controllers, we've got GoPro wireless mics. What? But first, Devin, instead of asking you what you've been up to, I thought we'd do a hey, what do you like and dislike about the previous show notes? Because I only get to see you every other show, and I've got these show notes open from 65 here, and we were talking off air about some of this. So, quick, give me the rundown of what you think about everything on this list.
Well, sure. Quick rundown.
You know, name what it first. So let's start with the aviator, travel crane, tripod.
Yeah, with the tripod. You know, it. First off, I don't know how good the head is. They didn't talk at all about the head, but for that price, I know that sometimes you'll get carbon fiber sticks for that price. But them including the head, part of me was like, well, how good is the head? Because I generally do like bigger heads because sometimes I'm running bigger cameras. And like you guys talked about on the show, they show a red on there, but how well does it really support a red and stuff like that? It's one of those where, yeah, it's really short and really stout, and the fact that the head can collapse inside of it does help to like make it small. But to me, because it's a ball head in general, it's just so wide. It's very, I'm not going to get into innuendos here, but it is. It's very hard to manage, and so I could see myself strapping it to my camera bag, and it's not really going to be taller than my camera bag, which is nice, but it's going to stick out really far away from my camera bag, and I'm still going to hit people when I turn around with it. So I see the portability, the whole thing of like fitting it on airplanes and stuff like that. I guess that works because to me, that height looks like the exact size of an overhead bin. Like if you put it, I don't know, perpendicular to the door, whatever. If you shove it
Okay, so
downward.
let's boil this down to: do you hate it? Do you love it?
I'm not in love with it.
Not in love with it.
There's some cool ideas, but I'm not in love with it. The tilt thing.
Yeah, let's talk about the electronic tilt shift.
Yeah, it's cool, but it's such an isolated thing. It's one of those I'd love to play with it, and I feel like if I owned one, after a week, I would never touch it again. To me, tilt shift just isn't that interesting. It's cool for a few one-offs, but it just isn't something that I'm going to get that excited for. It's a cool thing to experiment with, but,
Now,
take it or
memory
leave it.
card test, 64 gig, go!
This excited me. This one, I'm definitely going to buy one of these without question because, the SanDisk and like you said with the GoPro and you upgrading your firmware and everything like that, I did the firmware upgrade because I bought SanDisk cards because they've been fantastic except for their micro lineup. So this definitely provides another option, and it's so cost effective and everything's come down. And real quick, wanted to add too that even the Extreme for your Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, those SDs have come down because there's only one SD ever that's worked for raw recording or just generally stability, and that's been the 64 gig Extreme Pro, 95 megabytes a second or whatever.
Yeah.
And they have like a 128 of those now, which I haven't seen benchmarks on, but
They
it
have
costs...
a 256 of it as well. It's like,
yeah, and they've got 256, but the 128 right now is on Amazon for like $70. And
Nice.
this is if it has the same speed as the 64 gig, which I imagine it was because it's more space, it's definitely like totally worth the price. I remember spending like $100 for the 64 gig, I think a year ago. So huge drop in price for SD cards. Now's the time to buy. Which, once again, we'll talk about the GH4 prices later on in our show notes. The Sunspot issue, there's nothing I can say about that, then it's kind of disappointing, but you know what? I feel like we live in a world now where everything gets pre-released before it's completely done. Now that everything has software updates, people are just going to keep releasing stuff that doesn't work right out of the box, and that's kind of the world we live in, and we have to accept it.
All right, and the rest of that stuff is all just filler stuff that we threw in about camcorders and so on. Awesome, Devin, great rundown. Now, before we start in the regular news here, guys, I wanted to talk about one other thing. Rode is not a sponsor of this site, but you can tell from Devin and I's microphones that we do use a lot of Rode equipment. And I do like Rode, and I like Rode even more now. This is my Rode VideoMic Pro, And as you can see, the bottom is busted off of this guy.
Ooh.
So I sent them in a quick email, my serial number for my microphone, and without even questioning me or asking for anything other than my address, they sent me replacement parts for this guy right out of the shoes. So no real effort on my part, no problem whatsoever, and bam, now I have the replacement piece.
Did you see a similar kind of service with your DR60?
No, I did not. Yeah, so...
Or DR70, whichever model it is.
Yeah, Tascam was not nearly as friendly about simply going out and replacing my stuff. In fact, still no response from customer service on that. But
Ouch.
Rode, their 10-year warranty on their microphones, it's legitimate, folks.
Rode is
sending out free stuff, so that's
they're
really
all
nice.
they're all about happy customers. They know that in order to get into this industry, they need to create relationships, not just great products, and that's what they're about.
All right, I think on that note, we've talked enough for before
Yes.
the news. It might be time for the news. Time for the news. All right, first up here, I wanted to talk about this rather old school use of a Canon XC10. Now, if you guys are familiar with the XC10, we've talked about it before. It's a 4K shooting 1-inch sensor Canon camera that is made to look sort of like a DSLR. Interestingly, since it's a fixed lens, people were wondering what this would be like with a 35mm adapter. Now, I'm kind of dusting the cobwebs off here and dating myself, but man, I remember using these when I had an HV20 and a Canon GL1. These were great for adapting your old Nikon lenses with like a flip-over mirror and so on to a camera body. Now, what do you think about this, Devin? I watched the video. You watched the video. It's obviously soft at 4K, but is it a cool concept?
Dude, it's soft at 1080, man. To me, it's absolutely garbage. I couldn't see any practical reason of using it. The guy in the video mentions that as well, that he wouldn't ever recommend it. I mean, it'd be cool to experiment and try, and you could get a few different kind of looks. I mean, that's one of those things, is that there's some people who are just interested in old lenses for looks or feel of the lens, or other of these are artisan things or whatever. But really, I think that... it doesn't serve too much of a practical purpose. I know that it's a fixed lens, but I don't imagine that after you attach this and your other 35mm lenses and all this extra work, you're going to end up with something better than if you just spent that extra money getting a camera that properly fits this. We've talked about they're making a small form factor camcorder that lacks a lot of features, and part of the point of it is that it's small. That's the only thing you have going for this Canon. Is that it's small. It's not revolutionary. They aren't changing a whole lot. They're just making a smaller camcorder, and for that, they're going to sacrifice some features like XLR and all kinds of stuff. And so you attaching all this, you're just foregoing that. And so it's like, well, you might as well just get a full-size camcorder. Or, you know, they do make camcorders with interchangeable lenses. We talked about JVC's got some that do micro four thirds and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
All in all, like this would be a fun experience. This is something I would do because I love piece and random crap together. But I would never think of this as a solution for like creating better or more cinematic videos out of this camera because you don't seem to be in love with this camera.
Yeah, I'm not in love with the XC10 at all. I think it's a weird camera. There are so many other cameras in that price range that offer up the same abilities and basically either a almost 1-inch sensor or fairly close to. The interesting thing here is actually when I was looking at this rig, the old days, you didn't actually use a mirror system, and you can see in here that it's got the flip-over mirror. The trick was, in the old days, because the image is reflected upside down, is to actually mount your camera upside down. So I'm wondering if you used to mount your camera upside down, so that would go straight into your camera, and that way you would get your footage right side up when your camera was exported out to, from DV tape out to your editor.
I don't know if it was a lettuce adapter or what, but actually there wasn't an option for that. When I put the camera on rails and put it on I can't remember the brand now, but my old 35 adapter, I had a secondary monitor that was battery powered, which in those days was still like super expensive, even though it's really primitive. And I would use that, and I'd invert that monitor because even the monitor wouldn't have an option to invert the video. So I'd invert that monitor in post. Yeah, and then just invert in post. Back then, it was a DVX100B, so it was all DV tapes anyway, so it wasn't too much of a job to invert in post. But yeah, that's how I went about it. So I'm sure this is probably the end-all solution back when 35mm were a thing, but nowadays, you get a camera that small, I feel like get an A7s or something like that and put a whatever 35 millimeter lens you want on it, and now you're good to go, because it's still going to be manual. It's all going to be manual lenses, old FD or Nikon lenses. So you gain nothing by doing this other than losing brightness and losing sharpness. So there's really no reason to do this. But
for those of you who have never seen one of these before, go watch the video. There's links in the show notes. This was cutting technology in the early 2000s and late 1990s for getting that film look in your camera, unless you could afford like an XL1.
It was before the 5D Mark II revolution. This was way for the reason for this was because it was a way of getting 35 millimeter looking filmic kind of look on your camcorders, because the cameras that got you that 35 millimeter look, those digital cameras, were way out of the price range. We're talking well above $2,000 or $3,000. So spending $1,000 on a 35 millimeter adapter and things like that was still super cost effective for you to get that look out of your DVX 100B or your PD 150 from Sony, or any of those kind of old camcorders that were all running standard F mini DV.
I was running HD on this, man. I was using an HV20 that shot like you could output full 1080p out of the HDMI port and capture it with like a Blackmagic card. And so I used to test those, and then you had to do interlace issues because the footage came out, you know, in 60i, so you had to de-interlace.
Because it would be 60i, it wouldn't be 24 or anything like that. Man. Yeah, so it's that takes you back. See, I never suffered with this during HD. I then switched over to a T2i and then suffered with T2i, you know, not having proper audio inputs and everything else that came from the early days of doing DSLR video.
The HV20, that was
HV20.
That even was before, I think, the T2i as early release. I mean, that beat the 5D Mark III out, or Mark II out as a camera. Man, now you got me dated, but it's really interesting.
Now we're sounding like some old fogies.
Yeah, all you guys that are way younger than us, go check those rigs out. It's really interesting. It's kind of cool to see what we used to have to deal with back in the day to try and get what you can get out of a DSLR now. And so those are, and actually, I'm going to transition with that. Mine, I don't know where it's at. It's probably stolen. And you don't want your gear to get stolen, so maybe you should hold on to things and keep an eye on it. This is actually another sad story of gear being stolen here over at petapixel.com, and I've got a link to that in the show notes. This gentleman was going on several vacation trips and traveling all over the world with his GoPro and his camera, taking pictures and doing videos and so on. And somebody stole his camera bag, and with it, 8 memory cards full of his entire adventure, which basically represented 3 or 4 months worth of work. 150 gigabytes total were taken, and there's no way to get that stuff back. Now, I'm not saying that you should do anything particularly special, but this brings me into the thing that Mitch and I were talking about last episode, and I could not for the life of me remember it. And I did finally look it up. It's called, Kit Sentry? Kit Sentry, maybe? Yeah, doesn't Sentry have a C in it?
Sentry. Yeah, but I still think that's Sentry. I think that's what they're going for. I should just listen to the video.
Maybe it's Sentry, like the sentry that stands over and watches for protection. Anyway, these are really cool little NFC chips that go into your camera bag. They help track your gear and so on. I haven't paid attention to this project. It did get fully funded, so if anybody knows anything about this, I would love to hear more. Basically, it's a way to inventory your entire kit and keep track of everything and where it's located at with these simple stick-on tabs. So check that out if you're interested in protecting your gear. Do you have any other input on not losing your gear to theft?
Not losing gear? No, you know what? It's tough. Part of it, too, is also, as weird as it sounds, not being a tourist. And sometimes, too, that means when you travel is a lot of minimalism. Don't carry a lot of bags and stuff like that. But for the most part, this was a situation that was, I'd have to say, it's one of those, like, 1 in 100,000. Because
his camera bag was pretty obviously a camera
bag. Yeah. So, I mean, that makes it a high-risk target, but it's one of those where he looked away for a second and somebody grabbed it. And that isn't a likely way for stuff to get stolen compared to, like, I forgot it by this statue while I walked over here and took pictures for half an hour, and then I come back and it's gone. That's usually how most gear thefts happen, but on the train, anytime you're around like buses and public transportation, that's where these kind of like one-off moments happen. And so it's really unfortunate. I think, more than anything, he's probably really upset over the footage that's lost because he kept it all on one card. Kind of goes back to where you're talking about how you used to shoot on small cards so that like they'd be separated. But having your entire bag and all the cards stolen is terrible, terrible way to go about it. And if you're in America, you can write down the serial number, you can report it to Canon or whoever else, and sometimes things happen that way, but it's very unlikely.
Now, one thing I travel with, and it's kind of not a camera bag, looking camera bag, is this satchel right here. This is made by Tamarack. It's the Rally bag, and it has enough room for, a camera body, a couple lenses, and some batteries and so on. And no one knows that you're carrying a camera bag around with you. Plus, it's the messenger bag style. It's comfortable to carry with you, keep around your shoulder. And if you are in a public place, it's something that you don't set down on the ground because it's always on your shoulder. So I would guess that would be the best way to go. Plus, separate your memory cards from your dang camera bag, because your camera bag is always going to be a target no matter what. And if at least you have your footage in, I don't know, your backpack, your luggage, or something like that, it may at least save some of that from being stolen.
Yeah, and if you don't shoot on CFs and you're shooting on SDs fit in a wallet. I don't really care what kind of wallet you have. I've done that so many times where I've been at a shoot, and when I'm done, I'll actually just put SDs in my wallet all day, unless, there's a reason for me to put in my camera bag instead. But, yeah, you fit them in your wallet. I fit, 3 or 4 in my wallet after a day of shooting, and it's very unlikely that you'll lose your wallet and your camera bag in the same day. So
I use one of these. It's really handy. I've got a nicer one for rugged activities that's waterproof and so on. But it's for those of you listening, this is a micro SD card holder, and it's just a little clamshell pocket type of deal. That's nice and solid metal.
They're cheap.
You can slide it in with your wallet. They're cheap. They're like $10. Also, Gator cases, I believe, as well as Pelican make some waterproof, watertight units as well that are like this.
Keep in mind really the Pelican ones are crappy. By Pelican's
they've gotten
name.
better. They've gotten a lot better.
They have, but I've got one of the original models of the Pelican. I haven't had a problem yet, but lots of people have reported about broken hinges and broken this and broken that, which is unfortunate because Pelican carries such a big name when it comes to their big cases, and when they made these small cases, they seem to cheap out on a lot of stuff. But at the same time, I think even the Pelican version of that case is maybe $15, so it's definitely worth it if you're using more than one SD card.
Now, moving on down the line to remote controls, the Sony A7s and A7 series in general hasn't really been great as far as the button position goes. If you're not familiar with the A7s or any of the A7 cameras, it has the world's tiniest record button buried on the handle. It is a pain to get to. It sucks. And the camera in general, as far as starting and stopping recording, is a little bit obnoxious. You know what I'm talking about if you've used one. It's very rough when you're trying to autofocus and then switch back over to manual focus. And if you're using Canon adapted lenses, you run into all kinds of trouble there as well. This is a really nice attachment. They sell a wireless version of this as well as the wired version. And I've got a few different links here. The wireless version actually still uses an IR blaster, but gives you zoom controls, start-stop recording, as well as focus and lock. It's kind of an interesting deal. $68, very spendy, but the wires, or the IR blaster, and I didn't even realize there was an IR offering on that particular camera, is only about $9. So I'm interested to test this out. I've got one coming in the mail, so I'm going to play around with it. Well, Devin, do you use any remotes for your cameras?
No, not at all. I've been planning on it. I've been planning on it as I've been messing around with ideas of creating kind of an ENG rig and stuff like that. I've looked at some cheaper ones. You can find them for $10. I think it's pronounced Lance, but an LANC cord. It's the kind of cord that you would normally plug into a camcorder, a prosumer camcorder, and these controls run anywhere from just the record to a zoom, and exposure control. I think some even had focus. But I know that the Blackmagic Pocket camera has a port for it, and I think that it's the same kind of, I don't know how exactly it works, frequencies or whatever, that it is for the Panasonic. So I haven't gotten around to buying one yet. I've considered it, though, because as you start to build up your rig and you get further away from the screen, it then kind of becomes more of a hassle to click on it. I mean, with a GH3 or GH4, you don't have that problem because you can use the shutter because you're going to be in manual movie mode anyways in most cases. So it's not terribly necessary for me, but I saw somebody apply this on their handheld rig and went, DJ should look at this because he's always complaining about, that little button that Sony puts on their cameras that they still haven't changed even after their new Mark II. So.
Yeah, one of the things that's actually great about the IR blaster is that if you're using the Canon one, the RC1 or the what's the other? I don't remember. There's the RC1 and that's the good one, and then there's a cheaper one that I can't like the RC6 or something like that. You can actually fire off multiple cameras simultaneously as long as the IR signal can hit the sensor. And I've seen people actually build these really elaborate fiber optics cables on wire and aim it at 2 different cameras or 3 different cameras to do multi-shoot type stuff. Really interesting way to go.
Nope.
No?
I would never trust that. Just because I feel like you don't gain any convenience, because I would do something like that and then I'd walk around to each camera to make sure that it's recording. You know what I'm saying? So I feel
can't
like
just look at the lights on the front of the camera. I mean, you hear them all beep, and you see like the little.
Sure,
little
for
flash.
camcorders, for DSLRs though, I'm not used to seeing any lights or signification from the front of the body to tell me that's recording.
Yeah, now you got me thinking. I'm pretty sure there's a flash or a light or a beep of acknowledgement from at least.
Well, I guess you can turn on the beeps, but if you're firing off multiples, then you gotta like try to listen to where 3 beeps are coming from at once. It's just one of those where I go, I'm going to walk around anyways to check them all. I don't see a point in firing off multiples anyways. So to each their own, though.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting topic. And in fact, one of the things that if you're a blogger that's handy for that is aiming the camera at yourself and then hitting the record button on those remote controls. There aren't a lot of LANC enabled DSLRs out there, so it is kind of interesting that that style of remote works with the A7s. Now, while we're talking about professional control systems, let's take a look at this, and this is actually something Devin's excited about, and I will never be excited about, the Sony PXW X40. Devin, tell me about this camera, man.
X400. It's a 2/3 inch sensor. I know a lot of the listeners here aren't necessarily maybe big news guys or documentary filmmakers, but remember, too, these big cameras are where you get a lot of your features from and where a lot of technologies get developed that end up in the smaller cameras. This is a mid-grade camcorder for $16,000, which seems ridiculous considering it doesn't do like 5D shallow depth of field or something like that for your filmmakers out there. But what's interesting is it does come across a lot of great features at a very much lower price point than has ever really been before. Understand, too, these cameras are expensive because they're built to last 10 years. I've seen cameras like this that have gone on for 20 years, hustling along without a problem. Not a lot of other cameras have that kind of build quality, but one of the big features of this guy is that it can actually record an SDI signal, which a lot of cameras can't do. I know it seems silly because all your old school analog camcorders, you could use like a mini VCR, but these guys just never have SDI in. They never really built the hardware in unless you bought a top-of-the-line one, which costs well over $30,000, and you got a super expensive add-on card and a bunch of other stuff, then you could record it. So allowing these mid-levels to record SDI is important in news because in a lot of situations they won't allow 20 news people, news camera guys into one room to get, a person talking or something like that. So they do what's called a pool where they bring all their technology equipment together. All the networks say, okay, I'll cover audio, I'll cover this, I'll cover that, and then they all share the feed with each other. Well, this kind of is interesting because when you get that feed, you can actually record a copy of that feed locally on site onto your own camera. It's not like necessary every single time you go out, but it's one of those that can be a really handy feature the one day that you really could use something. As well, too, the way a lot of people go live these days is they use something called a TVU or I can't remember it. It's something that starts with DOE, but they're basically 4G modems is all they are. They put like 8 4G modems together. They spread the video signal across all of them. Yeah, and all the backpacks. They're of
like
course, satellite.
A poor man's link up, right?
Yeah, it's satellite guys hate them because it feels like that's putting them out of a job. But to be honest, the quality still isn't there yet to beat satellite. But this camera actually includes built into it Wi-Fi, Ethernet, and a USB port for a 4G card. I mean, that's only a single 4G card, but you can still send proxy files, This allows you to do live recording. This allows you to upload a stream to a station or something like that if you have nothing but the camera. They're, packing more and more stuff into one camera so that you don't need a truck, you don't need a laptop to do an uplink or anything like that, and potentially you wouldn't need one of those backpacks either. You could just do this with the camera by itself. So I know a lot of the guys that, but what is interesting too is that it's got an NFC, which I find really funny, that they've built a smartphone app to go with a camera like this, because that's something that you'd think you'd only see in the consumer end. But being able to launch a phone app that's connected with the camera and be able to control certain parts of the camera remotely, whether you put it on a jib or it's in a hard to reach area or you're across the site or something like that and you need to adjust exposure or something like that. There's a lot of really cool things you can do remotely with this camera. And I think potentially down the line, we've already started to see it with Panasonic. But I think eventually you'll start to see the Sony DSLRs and stuff like that start to incorporate a lot of these remote Wi-Fi features that can, frankly, come in super handy the few times you need it. It's not something that, every single time I go out, I'm going to use my camera as a viewfinder. But there's those few times where you go, man, I'm so happy I can do this. One time just for me, before DJ goes, because I know he wants to say something. I was shooting a restaurant, and this was photos, this wasn't video, but I was shooting photos of a restaurant, and I had my widest lens, but still I had to tuck the camera into the tiniest corner of the restaurant and not be anywhere near it for the picture. And I could have done a time delay and everything else, but I went, screw it. I launched the Wi-Fi, I popped up my phone, and in 2 seconds I set the exposure remotely and said click, and then did a 5-second exposure, whatever I was doing for whatever effect I had. And it was one of those where it was just wow, this made it a lot easier. I didn't have to guess. I knew exactly what I was getting, and I knew when it was done, and I knew when it was started. And, so it's one of those really, really handy features to have the few times you need it. And so it's one of those that isn't a reason to buy a camera, but it's definitely one of those huge benefits when you own one.
Now, with a feature like that, being able to run this from your phone, are they trying to eliminate cameramen in general and just send a single reporter / news gatherer out under one monochrome?
No. Per se, the news industry in general is really shrinking. There's so many. Still, when a big thing happens, when you're talking about President Obama's on a podium, you've got a bunch of these cameras facing him because they are the best looking cameras. Even though this one is HD2 only, which kind of surprised people. What, 16 grand? It doesn't even do 4K. But still, that's the way ENG is. ENG isn't there yet. They don't care about 4K yet. But no, these kind of cameras are too big and they're honestly too complicated. And you're right. What they're doing is they're sending out reporters by themselves, correspondents, with handy cams. They're sending them out with not usually JVC, but they'll send them out with some of the Canon camcorders. They'll send them out with the Sony camcorders, the EX3s.
I've seen local really news popular. People with even as low as those, is it the XR25, XA25? I think it's the XA25, which is just like a plain Jane 1080p camera with, an SDI output. They link that up to something, and then they can basically run it from a handy control remote / thing, and it's and they can even flip the monitor around so they can kind of see themselves to make sure everything's inside.
And that's how they're doing it. But a lot of them, when they're on site, they're running the cameras in full auto. They aren't camera people. They don't really know what they're doing. They may know enough to make sure white balance is set or something like that and focus is set, but they let the camera do all the automatic work for them because they're not a camera person, and that's where the news industry is going. And I feel like part of it is because cameras are becoming smarter, and you don't necessarily need cameramen in order to get decent quality. And the fact that the consumer base isn't asking for perfect quality, they're not picking news stations based on how good they look. They're picking them based off of whatever the headline is. So it becomes less and less important. These cameras, though, have been pretty much completely remote controllable for a long time. It's just usually there would be a giant cable, 5 times the size of an Ethernet cable. You'd run from the camera over to a rack-mounted control system where you can control iris, you can black level, white balance, you can control all that kind of stuff remotely. They build these things to be completely remotely operated. It's just now they go, you know what? No one's really running cables or doing that anymore. We need to set up a Wi-Fi system. And now they're doing it with NFC, which probably goes over to a Wi-Fi connection or something like that. So it's one of those where it's kind of exciting to see where this stuff is going. But, you wouldn't be wrong to say that these big ENG cameras are kind of like a dying breed. They're starting to go away because, news isn't exactly, crying for it. It's not like they really need better quality than what they've already got, because that doesn't affect their viewership, like I said earlier. And, they used to send out a producer, a correspondent, a cameraman, and an audio guy, and a lighting guy. And now they basically...
guy?
Yeah, they used to send out a lighting guy who would, like, either the generator would run off the satellite truck, or they would bring a generator, and they would set up HMIs way back in the day. Now what do they send out? A correspondent and a camera guy. Yeah. And the camera guy has to do the audio, the lighting, and everything by himself, and the correspondent has to produce the segment and direct himself and everything else. So... And then, like you said, a lot of local news, they just cut the camera guy. They have the correspondent just shoot their own stuff and send it back to the station. So it's definitely shrinking. There's not a whole lot of jobs in that industry anymore.
Well, and even with cameras like this, a station invests $15,000 or $20,000 in a camera. They're going to be using this camera for
a decade.
10 years or better. And I mean, I was laughing the other day because my wife and I were walking down for dinner and their local news was out, and we saw their camera, and I was like, oh man, the 1990s called, they want their camera back. It's like this monstrous, horribly old, dated thing still running DV tapes, and you're like, what the heck is going on here? And it's because the station invested so much money at that point, and then they're just running with that investment for this entire time. So it's really weird to me, since I'm not from the news gathering side of things, to see how they spend all this money on other things, but then they waste money, or they don't spend money on stuff that you'd think would matter.
The news industry is slow to change in more than one way. That's for sure.
All right, moving on to something we wanted to hit really quick. Devin, you got some new lenses. Sounds like you picked up the 35 to 100 f2.8 from Panasonic, as well as the 12 to 35 millimeter f2.8. I have had and gotten rid of one of these lenses, kept the other one. What do you think of them, man?
Of course, I haven't hit the 4G problem that you've been talking about as a loss of quality. But from somebody who went around shooting primes for so long, it's been such a pleasure to have zoom and image stabilization, and it's totally worth it, especially on the longer end too. I'm really impressed with how well that 35 to 100 stabilizes. It really is better than I thought it would be. So I'm a big fan of it. Now, I bought mine used. I looked out right now because I wanted to post these on like Amazon. You can buy brand new $780 for the telephoto and $650 for the wide to medium. And that, considering last year, it was probably a little north of $1,000. It doesn't get better than that. Like if you've ever been interested in these lenses, I doubt they're going to drop much more than they already have. I'm imagining Panasonic's probably coming out with something very soon or very new. DJ's going to pull up the Olympus probably right now and show that the Olympus is probably still going for north of 800. So, because that's the main competitor for your 12 to 35 f2.8 is the Olympus.
No, it's fallen too, man. Looks like the price for the Olympus 12 to 40 millimeter f2.8, I'm seeing used on Amazon for $675. So, and that's fulfillment by Amazon. So that's fairly...
So that's got an Amazon guarantee on it.
Well, yeah. I have to pay taxes up here because I live in an Amazon state now. So it's less efficient for me. But yeah, $675. I mean, that's come down quite a bit. I think it was $899 or better when I first started looking. I don't know. So I've used both of those lenses. I like the 100 or the 35 millimeter, or 35 to 100 millimeter f2.8. It's a great, sort of replacement for the 70 to 200 on a full frame body. Obviously, f2.8 is not the same on a Micro Four Thirds camera, so keep that in mind. But the IS on the 12 to 35 from Panasonic was just, it was washy. It washed out my image. And Devin's holding it up right now.
Yeah, I am.
But the positive side for Devin, and actually this is one of the things I loved about that lens, it's way lighter. It's way
totally
lighter.
Plastic.
And it's totally plastic.
Mine are that nasty purple, because mine are the used older version. I think if you buy brand new now,
they're black.
What we're advertising, they're black. But still, it's a dark enough purple, and I don't really care about what color my lenses are. And like I said, I just lucked out, because I did what you do, which I had if this then that on eBay to notify me when one of these guys would drop well below their price. and some guy did a buy it now for a mint condition version of this that's $200 cheaper than the new price. So
nice.
I lucked out because I jumped on that, I think, 5 minutes after he posted it. But yeah, for me, image stabilization, even if it softens the image a slight bit, it's still worthwhile to me because I do enough documentary shooting and kind of ENG style, run around, get this shot. And I mean, that's part of the reason why I like rigs. And, you know, part of it, too, is that there's some places where I can't use a rig. And so this just gives me options. I can use it or I cannot use it. Yeah, it's not, even though it's parafocal, you know, you can see that it changes kind of exposure as you go through the zoom range. You're not going to get a smooth zoom out of it. But that's also something that I'm probably not going to bother to hook up a motor to actually film a zoom on this, because zooming by hand is near impossible with DSLRs on video smoothly. But all those things considered, well, DJ can do it because DJ's amazing. He has these amazing hands.
I'm not amazing. I just do it like 10 times, and one of the shots will definitely turn out just by accident, pure luck.
Yeah, and you know what? The important thing to that, too, if you are trying to do a zoom with a DSLR, especially on cheaper lenses, like a Canon kit lens. I remember my old Canon 3.5 to 5.6, 12 to 35, whatever or 12 to 50, whatever they have. On the old kit lens on the T2i, if you have Adobe and you do the warp stabilization, that can really smooth out your zooms. Because it'll actually kind of do the warp it needs to. You'll play with it just like you do all the time. It's not like you can just turn it on and it fixes it. But you'll be impressed how much it'll smooth out a zoom. It's not just for smoothing out motion. It can also smooth out zooms. So that's something to consider too. But for me, I know DJ's got really good hands and he can keep his camera steady.
Another
I have problems with
trick. And this is something I've done many times. I love that Hitchcock zoom. And if you're not familiar with that, that's where you either pull towards your subject or away from your subject while changing your zoom range in order to keep them at the same distance and your view from the camera. And we actually get like 3 people together. This is not DJ's crazy stable hands. This is me running the zoom ring, someone running the slider, another person like panning and tilting to try and keep the camera in motion. And we do this probably 7 or 8 times before we get it right. And even at the end, like if you watch really close, you'll see a little bit of a hiccup in the move. But it's such a cool move that you completely forget about the little bump to the side. And it's the same thing if you watch interview shots on occasion. You'll see someone zoom in, and when they zoom in, it'll be a little rough. But you're not really focused on the zoom, and a lot of people don't even notice it. You're focused on the subject, and he's telling a compelling story. So if you zoom in a little bit and it's a little bit iffy, I mean, a lot of times that'll just slide. No one will even notice it. And Mitch and I were actually talking about this last episode. I mean, I've made huge, glaring continuity errors and stuff I've shot. I mean, there's a scene where the guy loses like 60 pounds just walking around the corner, and no one noticed. So
that was my favorite story.
Yeah, so sometimes
about going back for reshoots and the guy lost a ton of weight and one reshoot and but you're right. When it comes to filmmaking, if you're talking filmmaking, I mean, I guess, and even doing documentary featurettes and stuff like that, if people are connected to the story and they're compelled, then their attention is going to be on what's important. And if you're editing around what's important, you're always presenting what's important, then that's where their focus is going to be. Like, people think it's absolutely crazy that the original release of The Lord of the Rings had some, like, Volkswagen Bug driving across the landscape in the distance. But at that point, at that juncture, everyone was so compelled between the relationship between Frodo and Sam that their focus was on the bottom of the frame. They didn't care about the top of the frame. It was a big, beautiful field. They were focused on the bottom of the frame because that's where their heart was, that's where their emotions were, and that's what they were interested in. That's the part they wanted to see. And their brain just conveniently ignores the rest. I mean, it's like anything else, though. Once you point it out, it's like, oh, that's such a glaring thing. Oh, my gosh, and everything else. But I'm like, you'd be surprised, man. You get so involved in it, and your brain just starts to let go of a lot of problems.
Now, back to the 12 to 35 millimeter f2.8. Have you noticed the slight darkening when you're zooming on it? Have you tried that at all?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's like dark, bright. You know, it goes. It's got like 2 or 3 parts where it
jumps a little bit.
Yeah. And so, like I said, I don't imagine myself ever zooming on it because I don't imagine I'll ever go through the effort of motorizing it. And just because there's very few times where a zoom is even needed. in today's market. I know that sounds weird, but zooming in during a shot or zooming out is kind of, I don't know how to describe this, more of like a 90s thing kind of. It's a very newsy thing. It's a very TV looking thing. And with people wanting to create cinematic
so fun,
images,
though, to do that
know,
like
it's fun.
Cheesy, like what? And then you just zoom straight into their face.
Well,
and
if you're doing a smash zoom, if we're talking MTV style, then you can do that with any DSLR lens.
Yeah,
it doesn't need to be smooth. You could do that anywhere. But and I'm sure with a lens that long, your 200 to 400, you probably love zooming in and out on video because that thing looks brilliant when you zoom it.
Yeah, this guy, and actually one of the tricks I also use.
He's holding a
zooming,
Canon L, super expensive.
Yeah,
is that an f2.8 or something?
Yeah, this is the f2.8 IS 70 to 200. It's a very spendy piece of glass. One of the cool things about this lens is you zoom in by pulling down. So if you think about it, Devin always gives me crap because I'm like, I handhold everything and I don't worry about blah, blah, blah. But there's actually tricks to this. So one of the things that if you think about with this lens, like the easiest motion to make is actually zooming in because you're pulling down. When you're trying to go smoothly up, you're moving your shoulder and you're kind of gauging it. But if you just need to zoom in, and if you ever watch any of my stuff, you'll realize when I do zoom, I only zoom in, I never zoom out. And the reason is because when I zoom in, I can easily control my motion by slightly turning my wrist. But when I'm zooming out, I have to be very cautious and like move my whole arm and everything. So it's much more noticeable to do that. And so that's the secret sauce that I use. I don't know if that works for everybody. Now, the other thing, and while we're still on these lenses, the manual focus on it, how do you feel about the fly-by-wire on that? Is that acceptable?
Yeah, I'm not thrilled by it. But to be honest, that's part of the reason why I wanted this lens is that just about every other lens I have is a prime. It is manual. Most of them are Nikon, old manual lenses with manual irises and manual focuses. So I've been doing manual for a long time, and part of my reason for wanting a lens like this is for that wanting to be able to do autofocus in the few instances where it would be really crucial, or for doing photography work. Because that's part of the problem too, is like without it being a DSLR, I really don't like the EVF. The EVF on the GH3 is horrid anyways, but even using the screen, trying to pull focus for photography is way different than pulling focus for video. Because photography is such a higher resolution, you really need to nail it. Otherwise, you're going to be able to tell when you take it into post and you blow it up in your big monitor and see your photo. So for me, it's and like soft video is forgivable. A photo that's out of focus is never forgivable. Like just in just about every situation, unless it's stylistic.
I mean, if you crank it down to like 610 by 400, then no one will ever notice that it was soft.
Right. So that's part of the reason is that I wasn't thrilled by the fly-by-wire. Yeah, the Olympus has hard stops, and that would be nice, and for repeatable focus and everything else. But I was kind of looking for a lens that would give me more of a documentary option. It would turn it a bit more into a camcorder. So I'm not thrilled by it. I would have preferred if there was hard stops. But I was willing to forego that for the fact that I could get image stabilization as well as being cheaper. It's easier on my budget than the Olympus. So that's why I deal with it. I'm not thrilled by it, but I'll deal with it.
Now, while we're nerding out about lenses here, I did want to mention one other plug for Olympus, and I don't own any Olympus bodies, guys.
That's what's funny about this.
I know everybody that has Olympus cameras, they love Olympus cameras, they're professional, blah, 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 nice styling. I agree, I like the look of Olympus cameras, but I shoot on a GH4, that's that. Now, this is an Olympus lens, though, and even their smallest lens, this is the 17mm f1.8, even the smallest lenses in their collection, look at this, click, and end stops. Nice, full twisting. I mean, that's not a lot of swing. Obviously, I'm not going to put a focus puller on there, but I can still get just enough out of this to pull focus on a shot and not have much of an issue. And Olympus is really good about including this on all of their levels of lenses. And you take that in comparison to this 25mm f1.4 that I have right here. And I mean, this focus ring is just endless spinning, weak feeling, loose, wiggly.
Well, and the problem is that it's not going to be repeatable. It's one of those where when you shoot enough in manual focus, which everyone's supposed to do unless you're DJ, because he's
just
talked
break
about
all
it before.
the rules. I don't do anything the right way.
When you do, the more and more you do of it, the more you'll appreciate something that has a mechanical focus. Whether it's your prime, like I've got prime Rokinon, Nikon lenses and stuff like that. And what's great about it is that there's no slop in it. So when somebody steps forward, they step back, you kind of, in the scene, you start to figure out exactly how far you need to move back and forth, and it's always at the same mark, and it's always on point, and that's what's great about it. Something I struggled with is my SLR Magic 35mm T1.8. It's not the expensive one. It's the cheap one that's maybe like $300 or something like that, because I think they've got a 35mm that's like T0.95 as well. But
yeah.
Anyways, the cheaper one has slop. Even though it's a mechanical focus and has hard stops, there's probably a good like 2 millimeters of slop. So then when I'm in a scene trying to get focus as they go back and forth, I go to where I think the focus should be for a person that far away, and it's off, and I got to go further, and then they get further away, and then I go back, and it's not enough. And so when you start to like deal with like you have mechanical focuses and you go back to something that's either wire or it's sloppy because it's just poorly made, you'll start to have an appreciation for those hard stops. Like I said, I'm not thrilled about it. I'm going to accept the fact that my Panasonics have a wire focus because the other features are a bit more important to me than that. So just because I have so many manual focus lenses, I need something I can actually take photos with. That's kind of was one of the reasons, along with having autofocus for a cheap price. And then, like I said, they are super cheap. One last thing, because you're talking about how you never focus in the reverse direction because
I never zoom in the reverse direction.
You never zoom in the reverse direction because of that problem. Some people, because I've had that problem before, remember, you can take your follow focus and attach it to your zoom ring too. It works both ways. So you can use a follow focus way of turning it to actually zoom in and out. I've done it on 1 or 2 shoots. It's been immensely helpful when I needed to do a lot of quick zooming. But to each their own.
There's actually one other reason to do it the way I do it, and it's something that's less apparent if you don't know much about very expensive cinema lenses. These DSLR lenses are not parafocal. They seem like they might be, at higher f-stops, you could appear to be. But the nice thing about even a lens that's not parafocal is if you're zooming from wide to close-up, it will stay in focus because of the nature of the lens. It's when you actually go from close-up to wide that the parafocal issue becomes a problem and you start to see the drift in focus. So it's another sort of cheat. They don't tell you about this, but if you try to do that continuously, your focus points are going to drift, and it's going to look bad going wide, but it never fails the opposite direction.
Yeah,
and I don't know the math behind that. I just know it's a thing.
I can rant about that for 30 seconds before we move on to the next topic. That is an old teaching for a lot of people that they carried over into DSLR. That's actually the wrong way to go about it. And you can test this for yourself for your own gear. Well, the whole zoom in, set focus, then zoom out, that was something we did with the DVX100B, other mini DV camcorders, basically every camcorder you've ever owned. That's how they taught people to focus. And in news, with those ENG cameras, like the one I talked about earlier and everything else, that's exactly how you focus those lenses because they are parafocal. That's one of the reasons why those lenses cost 10 grand. For something that covers like 1/5 of what a Canon DSLR sensor has, and that's because they're built that way. So DSLRs, that's why it's important that a DSLR has an easy way to crop in, or maybe even your monitor that you're using, your EVF or something, has a way to punch in, because zooming all the way in, setting focus, and zooming out on a lot of DSLR lenses is not going to give you the results you want. So that's why punch-in is so incredibly important if you're using a DSLR for video shooting.
Yeah, so the trick I'm talking about, you don't focus close up, you actually focus wide, and then you zoom in. And because of the nature of the way the glass moves, your object will still be in focus when you get to the close point. And that's just a weird trick.
Right, but I'm saying I've seen so many guys who shoot video who've zoomed in their DSLR, set their focus, and then zoom back out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and that's where I'm confused. I'm like, what?
Yeah, no. Because the way that you do it, that works because of the way that the lens elements move.
No one ever told me about that trick. I just discovered it one day. I was like, oh, look. Because I wanted that cheesy zoom in. I mean, I shoot horror
Right.
films on occasion, and that's a great thing to have. Is like someone stares directly into the camera and says something ominous, and you zoom into their face. And I was
Right.
trying to figure out how that would work
With
and
a
then,
DSLR without
Exactly.
motorized zoom.
And then I figured out, well, wait a minute. If I focus wide and then zoom in, they still stay in focus. I don't know why this is. It doesn't work the other way. And there's
Right.
there's huge forums devoted to this technique.
But yeah, so guys, that technique is a real technique, but it only works on parafocal lenses. And chances are, if you're on a DSLR, it's not a parafocal lenses. Some of the Canon L series will actually do that kind of nicely because they're pretty expensive, but you can't be sure unless you test it, and you definitely, can't be sure unless it's one of those ridiculously expensive Canon Cinema Zooms.
Oh,
Because
those
those
are
are
nice,
parafocal.
though.
Those will
Yeah.
hit every time. But that's part of the reason why they cost so much. So
All right, now we've talked about expensive stuff. We've talked about cheap stuff. Let's go to mid-price stuff here. This is really interesting, actually, and this is probably what I should have led the show up with. I'm kind of excited about this.
Really?
Bluetooth-
I didn't think you would be.
Yeah, okay, so what do you want to do with the GoPro? And actually, guys who are not watching the video, for the audio listeners, this is a backpack for your GoPro that allows you Bluetooth access to a wireless microphone that plugs into the USB port, taking advantage of the USB audio adapter system for the Hero. And I've got a couple different flavors here. This first one is from, looks like... it's called the RMA1M1. Yeah, Renew. This other one is Sena GP1. Both of these are interesting. And the reason I'm excited about this is because what's the biggest downfall of a GoPro video?
It's always audio.
Always audio. Audio is always awful. And, you think people are going to do extreme sports stuff, but, a lot of times they're just talking to the camera, bicycling about, skateboarding around, and talking while they're doing so. This is perfect. At $100, you plug it in, you get Wi-Fi or wireless audio via Bluetooth to what appears to be an okay-looking microphone setup. Not amazing, but the other unit I linked to, the Sena GP1, that actually allows you to pair with any Bluetooth device. So if you have a Bluetooth headset that provides good audio, if you have a Bluetooth microphone, if you have one of those Sony Bluetooth microphones, I mean, that gives you a fairly wide range of wireless mic options.
But to go back, the Removu M1,
I'm not going to even try and
whatever it
pronounce
is,
that.
Right? That one will actually work with third-party Bluetooth microphones. You can actually sync that with any microphone. That's why on paper, I don't know because I haven't tested both of these side by side, but on paper, that one's the better deal because you're getting both the mic and the backpack for $100, and the backpack fits inside of a normal GoPro case because they're using a very slim USB cable to interconnect the two. The other one you posted, it's like $100, I think, for the backpack. It's got a very big brick on the side, so you need to use their casing. So I don't know how much their casing is, but you got to use their casing because GoPro doesn't have a quarter 20 because that's the way GoPro rolls.
I think this one comes with its own frame, blank frame.
It gives
right
you a
here.
frame. If you want it waterproof, that's the part you have to buy extra.
Yeah, that's true.
And then their microphone, I think, is still like $60 if you want their microphone, which looks like a decent microphone, but it's just, $150. Looks like a decent microphone, but it is one of those that, like, okay, now you're spending close to $200 for an audio solution for a GoPro. So
That's true.
But you know what? It could totally be worth it. I haven't really heard that many sound tests from these things. I haven't seen a lot of people that have gotten them yet or compared them side by side. But I would love to. But the for right now, the first one I can't pronounce that name. Whatever, RMA1 and the M1.
How about Removi?
Removi. They seem like a really good price. This is the same company that made the little wireless wristbands that DJ wasn't a huge fan of because he said they're a bit flaky. They also make a version of the wireless wristband that's like $20 cheaper that lets you use your own GoPro backpack. It's probably just as flaky, but
I've used this wireless wrist adapter before, and they're a pain in the butt to pair. They skip out on you on a regular basis, and the screen quality is roughly the same or worse than the backpack that's included with the Hero. So not a great attachment. But this audio thing, man.
But this audio thing makes sense because that's like filling a gap that GoPro, and it's not GoPro's fault. They just, there's no way to work around it. Has any camera had fantastic onboard audio or onboard mic audio? And the only ones that have are like camcorders that come with shotgun mics, already attached to them.
GoPro's done a good job of addressing this from the 3 Black Edition to the current version.
The 4?
The 4 Black Edition, and I have a bag somewhere with them all shoved in there. I think a light's sitting on it back there. But the thing is the audio on the 3 Black was rough. Like, there was some static noises. The noise floor creeped up around the minus 38-ish dB range. A lot of people were getting weird interference when they had Bluetooth devices or Wi-Fi in the area. The Hero 4 Black Edition, if you use the USB to audio adapter, you can get darn good audio quality out of this with just like a basic Rode VideoMic Pro plugged into it directly. Or they even sell these cute little stereo mics with windscreens that you can attach to the front of it. Now this, if you can find a Bluetooth adapter that allows a wired like lav mic to be plugged in, you would really have the ultimate remote blog camera type of thing. Because now you can run it from your phone. You can get good audio out of it, decent video quality, you get 4K footage, and it's super tiny, so you can take the whole thing with you. I don't like that it's AGC controlled. That's a little bit of an issue, but GoPro seems to do a pretty good job, especially in the Hero 4 Black Edition, of keeping the noise floor from really creeping up like you see on the early iterations of AGC on Canon cameras. So
here's what I see. Here's what I see, because I listened to the initial audio tests, and honestly, while most people are focusing on voices, it still sounds fantastic. I'm guessing it's an omnidirectional pickup pattern because that would make sense. The microphone does come with a waterproof casing as well. Where I could see myself really using this thing is for environmental audio. There's so many times where you're putting a camera in a place, whether it's in a car or, it's on top of somebody skiing or something like that. You're putting the GoPro somewhere. And half the time you go, you know what, it would have been nice to use some of this GoPro audio to maybe be like a sound bed underneath, like a voiceover or something like that with an interview or something. But you never go to it because it's always tinny and it's always crappy. And I mean, yeah, you're right. They've come a long way and they've really worked on like making it as good as it can. I'm just commenting on the fact that using the tiny microphones they built into the thing, even though they do wind reduction and everything else, it's always going to be lackluster, and it's never going to really meet the standards that people like us want to have for, audio that you use. You wouldn't use that audio for an interview, just stick the GoPro a few feet away from their face and use that audio.
Yeah, that'd be awful.
So that's what I mean by the audio is just, it's always going to be crappy because there's only so much you can do with such a small diaphragm and a small package. But this guy, I imagine just attaching him, whether maybe even on top of the GoPro like housing as well, just to get better environmental audio that's all waterproof, and I can throw that into an extreme condition or something like that, and then come back and actually use some of that audio. Maybe not specifically like an interview or something, but you're right, vloggers and people like that, this would be a perfect utility for. But for me, I see it using it for, getting like some of that natural audio to mix in with the rest of your sound bed as you kind of like, build a picture. If it's about a guy skateboarding, imagine like getting better audio of your GoPros of him like hitting the half pipe or something like that. It's just going to make your whole... So I see myself using it in more ways than one. Like, obviously, the first thing is like, I'm vlogging here, but I also see it using as just like, here's a great mic that is waterproof for your GoPro, where most GoPro mic options that are pretty good, because you can use Rode and a few other ones, they tend to be really big, and they definitely aren't waterproof, and that most of the time they make it so that your GoPro is no longer waterproof, which kind of prevents you from putting it in certain situations, which is kind of the appeal of GoPro, is putting it in crazy situations.
Yeah, now, this does come with a waterproof case for the microphone as well, so... And you can see that here. Let me see if I can present my screen. It doesn't show it very well, but you see right there it's in an enclosure. So I'm wondering what the audio sounds like inside of the enclosure as well.
I imagine you'll lose a lot of the high end, but you're still getting a bigger diaphragm, and it's probably the outside water housing that's like probably very light. You definitely aren't probably going to dive with it, but I'm sure that it makes it somewhat waterproof. You can put it in a pool, and it'll probably still get you better stuff than the creaky, plasticky sound you get out of GoPros when you put them underwater.
Yeah, this is definitely interesting. I would love to test this out. Good catch on the Bluetooth adapter. I didn't realize that you could pair this with anything besides the unit that came with it. That's why I was looking for other ones.
And the pricing makes it a good deal. $100 you get both the backpack and that, and it fits in normal housing, so you don't need to buy extra housings. So But at the same time, like I said, I can't compare them side by side yet. So the Sienna may just like have absolutely better microphone and better audio quality. I imagine it's got a better microphone. Just judging by the design of the microphone, I think it's probably a better microphone. But I'm not going to say anything until I can really hear them side by side.
All right, moving on. We've got just a couple of things left, and I think we've filled up an entire show here, Devin.
We
without
have
even
already.
Hitting
Yep, we
the
did it
filler
again.
Material. There's two things I wanted to mention. One is the GH4 pricing. I talked about this last show. It's dropped another $15. The GH4 from Gray Market now is coming out at about $965. So I don't know if there's a new GH5 coming around the corner. I've also seen a good price fall off on Micro Four Thirds lenses over the last couple of months, which is really interesting. The 15mm f1.7 has dropped in price substantially, and has got me looking at that Panasonic Prime that was otherwise not on my list. The last thing, though, that I wanted to throw in here before we get out of here, Devin, is actually the Canon 35mm f1.4 Mark II. Now, I own the original. It's in my bag down here somewhere, but I've been trying to talk myself out of talking myself into buying the Mark II. I'm looking at this lensrental.com review, and if you guys aren't familiar with Lens Rental, they're not a sponsor of the site or anything like that, but they do an amazing job of tearing down some of their lenses, cameras, and so on, and their blog has some great stuff if you just want to spend some time with a person that actually has to do repairs on these items. So go check that out if you're interested. They just have a quick little blurb up on the 35mm f1.4 Mark II. It is a spectacular looking lens. Upside is they've added weather sealing. It's actually made out of somewhat a metal body as opposed to plastic like the original. And it's got upgrades in many of the ways that I wanted the original 35mm f1.4 to be upgraded. But $1,700, is it worth it to me? Probably not. I don't know. Devin, what do you think?
No. Well, because once again, the side-by-sides, I'm not really seeing enough performance to even justify selling your Mark I for a Mark II. And like the weatherproofing and everything else is nice, but you got to ask yourself how many times you're going to be in a situation where that's really going to be a requirement of yours. I know for a lot of photographers, weatherproofing is huge. If they're out in nature and they're out doing kind of that photography and event photography. I feel like, though, because of video, because we've got microphones attached and all this other stuff, we're either like wrapping all of our gear to be waterproof, or we're like setting up a tent or something like that, or just shooting around the weather, the pavilion or something like that. So as a video maker, waterproof lenses aren't something that I put high on my priority list of when I'm buying a lens, what I'm looking out for. But I know for photographers, that's probably a huge deal because they go out and shoot in the mud all the time.
I can tell you that I did spring for the 24mm f1.4 Mark II, and I sold my Mark I. But the reason for that was actually the 24 Mark II is much better autofocus control of the lens in general than the original 24mm f1.4. I don't see that as a thing for the 35mm f1.4 because it was a great lens in the original form. This one is it feels like the upgrade between the 16-35 and the 16-35 Mark II. Like the Mark II, it's sexy, but is it so sexy as to just ditch my otherwise stable relationship that I have with my 16-35mm? I mean, she's been with me through thick and thin, stuck together when times were tough, and now I'm just going to leave her for a newer model. That's kind of sad, guys. It's kind of sad.
Yeah. Well, and what do you estimate the upgrade price would be on that? Like
it's about $800 probably, because I'm looking at the used price of my 35mm f1.4, and it looks to be hitting it right about $1,000. So yeah,
you know what? Right now is a great great time to buy a Mark I. I tell you that because it's a great performing lens, and for $1,000, if you're into Canon L series glass, which I'm particularly not because I don't have a whole lot of electronics that work with it, but every time these Mark II come out, pretty decent price drop.
I'm looking at Amazon right now, and the used price of the original 35mm is dropped down to $749 for used but good condition. Holy cow, that's a big kick in the pants. So
So, hey, if you're interested in Canon glass, the Mark 1 will probably service you just fine, and it's way cheap.
Man.
For L series glass to be like $750, I'm not sure there's a lot of lenses that are cheaper than that with the red band.
Well, the 135, and don't ask me why I have so many Canon lenses on my desk right now. This is a Canon 135 f2, and this is one of the cheapest L-series lenses on the market. You can pick this up for around $600, $650. Also, the 24 to 105 with the red band f4. If you're really into an f4 lens, you can get that sometimes used or new for about $600.
If you've got a like a 5D Mark III body that can do some pretty high ISO while still, maintaining itself, you don't get the shallow depth of field necessarily, but you do get a decent, zoom for pretty cheap. So, I see the market for it. I can't imagine I'd ever buy it because I'd always look at that f4 and just resent it. But to each their own.
I went from the Sigma 30mm f1.4, which I used on crop sensor bodies, APS-C sensors, and I switched over to the 35mm f1.4. And I think that years ago I did a comparison video, and you get done watching it, and you're like, which one was better again? And it's because the $400 lens is just that good that when you're looking at the 35, you only really choose the 35 because it's expensive. And it's full frame, of course. So, if you're shooting on a full frame body, you're going to have to go that route. But if you're shooting on a crop sensor body and you have the Sigma 30mm f1.4, and I think they have the 30 f1.4 Art now too, which is the newer version of that. And it's a fairly sexy little APS-C sensor lens. So, don't spend the money just because you need that 50 look on your crop sensor body. If you can get it for cheaper, and you're not planning on going to a full frame camera, then it's probably a good investment.
No, I've been not that I would pull the trigger, but that Sigma zoom, the 1.8.
Oh yeah.
For what's it? I mean, it's not that long of a zoom. It's 18 to 35, but still. Still, it's 1.8. I've been looking at that, in maybe a Canon mount with the Metabones being like a real sweet package to put on the front of a GH4. But, still haven't, because that'd be like about $1,000 to get a Metabones plus the $800 Sigma. So, I mean, but the thing is that it's cheap and it's 1.8 because it's APS-C sized. So it's not going to work on your 5Ds and your full frames. But still, I've seen just amazing things about it and amazing performance for a lens that costs really not a whole lot compared to everything else out on the market.
The thing, though, and I know we're kind of off on a tangent now, but
on
the GH4, going to f1.8 is not nearly as attractive as it is on a full frame or even APS-C sensor body. I mean, I've got the 60 right here, and the reason I have all this Canon glass out is I just finished a shoot yesterday with the Canon 60. I just took it out because that was the camera I wanted to use. But anyway, the point is 51.2 on this is gorgeous. I can knock out the entire background. I could put just someone's nose in focus. With the GH4, even with the Voigtlander 25mm f 0.95, you're getting the field of view of about I want to say f1.8 on a full frame body, maybe f2. Right.
So
it's still sexy, but it's not nearly as bokeh-licious as you get out of
because you're obsessed with shallow depth of field. You're all about compressing the scene down into a big blur of colors.
I want to force you into looking at what I want you to look at. You can only see that, and everything else is just mush.
He paints pictures with silhouettes. That's what he does. No, for me, I just think that I'm more worried about exposure because the GH4 isn't a low light camera.
Yeah.
That I think about things like a Sigma 1.8 plus, a Metabones would get you pretty good exposure. It's not going to get you 5D shallow depth of field, but I'm more concerned about getting enough light. Though there's a few guys who've posted that they don't like Metabones. They think that it's got a lot of flare or something like that inside of it. I mean,
you get some weird light effects. Occasionally you'll get sort of like a bounced soft image. I've been shooting something and I will move the camera just so, and it'll catch the light from the wrong angle, and the whole scene will go soft or the contrast will completely go away. It'll
wash out.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't put my finger on when or where it's going to happen, so you really have to kind of pan through what you're shooting ahead of time to make sure that you know. And I've been using it more. I actually took it as my backup because the Metabones focus system works on the GH4 now.
It works.
So I threw it in my camera bag with the 6D. I took it out on my last shoot and used it as the second body to my 6D for most of my main stuff. And man, that is nice. And then you want to talk about sexy. It's still not as sexy, but putting the 24 and the 35 millimeter f1.4 on the GH4 with the Metabones adapter, it's pretty good.
You're liking it.
Yes.
See, for me, you know, as much as I like the primes and everything else, I have so many primes. I've been trying to look over at the Zooms, and so hence the Panasonics. But in researching that, I think to myself, and I'm like, man, even if you got something that didn't have a whole lot of zoom, like the 18 to 35 Sigma, you get the Metabones, and it gets a little wider and it gets a little faster. And then when you need more of a telephoto, you just get something that passes the electronics through, like that other Canon adapter you have. And now you get, on the GH4, that makes it a what?
Yeah, it's a × crop factor. So
yeah, so I'm trying to think of what 18 × 2 is, which is what's throwing me off. A 360
that would be what, like
to
36.
Yeah, 36. Yeah, that's what I meant when I said 360.
36 to 70 roughly.
Yeah, so you get kind of a wider. You get, I feel like, more use out of that lens by having both a Metabones and a non speed booster. So it's one of those kind of things where you get a few different options, and I think of more ways to use a single lens as I try to save money while acquiring every lens in the world, so I can somehow get close to DJ on the mountain of lenses.
Oh man, you don't want to be in my boat. I'm actually doing a calling this week. If you're in the Portland area and you're on Craigslist, I'm getting rid of my 24 to 105 f4
Everything
lens.
must go.
I don't know why that's even in my collection. I have the Tamron 24 to 70. Don't need the 24 to 105. For some reason, I got it in a kit because it was on sale, and then I just kept it. I have the original wide-angle Canon L-series lens, the 17 to 35 millimeter f2.8. I've had that one for somewhere in the range of like 10 years, and it's a great lens, but I have the 16 to 35. I don't even know why I hold on to the 17 to 35 anymore. It's some of those sorts of choices in my collection. Same thing, I have the 51.4 and the 51.2. Why do I need a 51.2 and a 51.4? I don't know. I've been throwing the 51.2 in my kit with my Panasonic gear. And same with the 85-1.8 and the 85-1.2. Like, I don't really need both of them. I end up using the 85-1.8 way more than the 1.2, but I don't know. I buy too many lenses. Don't do that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And now he can't get rid of them.
Yeah, that's on that note, I think it's time to wrap this show up. Devin,
absolutely.
Where can people find you, man?
People can find me on Twitter at DevoCut to hear me talk to myself.
And on that note, folks, you can find this podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, and anywhere else podcasts are distributed. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tell Devin how great of a guest host he is every week, because I love Devin being around. Also, this was episode 66. We are moving forward.
Wow.
If you guys have comments, complaints, concerns, or questions, feel free to put them in the YouTube notes, and
tell us what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show,
because we haven't really done question and answer very much. Occasionally we get one or two that we respond to, but I've been kind of lazy in general about that. So guys, if you have questions that you'd like to hear us talk about on the show, just let us know. On that note, we'll see you next time on another exciting episode of DSLR Film Noob Podcast. And that is it for the audio listeners. That was a fun show. I'm drinking during the show, so if I got a little off,
that's always fun. No, that's the best part. That's what I should start doing. I just can't afford beer. Are you gonna play Fallout 4?
Oh man, I don't have the lifetime to give up to that.
I know, man. I started all this stuff at the studio and working 12 hours a day. Even though I wasn't that interested originally, working 12 hours a day, I'm like, man, I just love to go home and play a video game right now. And Fallout 4 seems just right.
I like every time I turn my TV on, because I have a computer attached to it, my gaming machine, and I see like your friends are playing Fallout 3, and everybody was playing like Fallout 3 to get ready for Fallout 4.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it was released, like I see a whole string of sick days coming in from people, and they're all just donating 300 or 36 hours of straight Fallout time to beat the game. It's just, I want to do it, but I just don't have the freaking time.
Well, and I'm normally not like an RPG guy. But then all the complaints people were making about this version of Fallout, I was like, oh, I'm totally into that. Where they're like, oh, the map like only takes 11 minutes to walk across. But then it's like, right? Well, and too, like, and I'm like, okay, so instead of like how it used to be, the very few times I played Fallout 3 where you walk forever and you see maybe one house that you can't walk inside of. Now you've got all these buildings that you can walk inside of and explore. I go, I don't care if it takes 11 minutes to cross the map. That just means I can get to wherever I need to go quickly. There's still a huge world for me to explore. So I don't know. It gets me more and more interested the more that I see people play that game.
My Steam library is ridiculous, though. The last sale came through, and I bought a bunch of aspirational games, and I'm just waiting until I get the flu or something so that I can actually stay home for a good solid week and just game nonstop.
I have to return this.
What?
Because
What's wrong
the guy
with it?
shipped me the wrong lens.
What?
He shipped me the super zoom that was f4 to 5.8, not the f3.5 to 5.6.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Mark II of the lens. So, which all of his images, the title of it, everything was that way. And so after this arrived, I was like, dude, what's up? I was like, oh, it broke. Or like that must have been the one that broke on my other camera when it fell. So sorry about that. I just got confused. Like, do you want a reduced like price or something? And I'm like, no. I'm like, cause this version of the lens, this super zoom now goes for maybe like $250.
Okay.
And I spent $350 because most of the guys with the updated super zoom go for like $400.
Now, what's the range on that guy? Because I'm not familiar with that particular. I don't even look at anything that doesn't have a fixed aperture. Sorry.
Right. This is a 14 to 140.
14 to 1. Oh, okay. I thought that was a pancake.
No, dude. How are you going to fit a pancake 14 to 140?
What's the... Isn't there... Oh, maybe it's 14 to 40. Isn't there a 14 to something like pancake zoom?
This is the stock one, which is your 14 to 45.
Oh,
and they
okay.
Make a pancake version of this with a motorized zoom. That's
For some reason, I was thinking that was like a super zoom, like a 145 or so.
It's because if you don't know about the size of these lenses, it kind of looks like the super zoom in the way that it stretches out. But I'm surprised too how big. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised how big the super zoom is. But when you compare this guy to the Panasonic, 100, 35 to 100 or whatever, this guy is like thick. He's huge and he's a lot more meaty. So. But now that I've found these two for these kind of price, I feel like the super zoom is kind of overkill. But it still doesn't get me a whole lot past 100, and I would kind of like something that gets me maybe to 150 or 200. So,
well, do you have 135 in your collection? I mean, slap that on with a Canon adapter. There's a couple of cheap 135s available from the FD series of lenses from Canon. I think you can find the...
Yeah, you know what? I should be looking at FDs.
Yeah, and in fact, I almost talked about this on the show. We're still on YouTube right now. So
we are still live,
yeah. But
so it's technically on the show.
So this right here, and this is an FD lens, and this is the Canon 55mm f1.2. And I mean, you have to like the look because this old FD glass sort of gives you, I don't want to say yellow, but a very warm look to your image.
Does.
So you have to be ready for that, and then the light fall off on the sides is still strong even on a crop sensor camera. But you can find this 55 f1.2 for, man, I want to say like $300 or $400, if not less.
Really?
It's way cheaper than the Nikkor.
Well, because I'm looking right now at like 135s, and there's some f2.8s that are like for 50 or 60 from Japan. There's an FL that I've never heard of that apparently
FL is pre-FD, so because it goes FL, FD, and then EOS. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, dude, look at this lens. This lens just looks ridiculous. Let me send you a link here, or I can share my tabs, can't I? I keep forgetting that's an option.
Oh wow. Oh, f2.5. That's not bad.
Right. I mean, it's an FL, but just look at that image. It looks so pretty because it's such a skinny lens compared to the glass elements.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure it's filled with fungus, though. It's an old lens.
Well, I mean, you're going to get kind of a personalized
Yeah.
look out of this thing no matter what. So there's nothing you can do with that. But it's
No, but still, it's
they're super
you're right.
compact. You're going to need an adapter, but 135. That's what 270.
yeah, that
on-
reaches out there.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good reach. And then f2.5. I mean, that's pretty good, really, for getting basically telephoto.
Right. No, that's not bad at all.
The other one, they called it the trash can, and it was because the lens was shaped like just a giant trash can barrel, and I can't remember. It's a Canon lens. It was something wacky like 400 or maybe it was 400 f2.8 or something. The lens was like considered. No, it's not the 400 f2.8. It's a zoom of some kind. It's a really weird one, and it was considered by many to be junk just because of the range on a full frame sensor. But if I find it, I'll send you a link to it. It's from the 90s, and it was before. It was like their first range before they got L series glass, but it was like right up against what was considered L series at the time. It's still like Canon's early L series stuff, like my 17 to 35. It's a bit wobbly. Like, the stuff isn't quite as nice. It isn't as well put together. It's a good lens, but
Sure.
yeah, if you look for some of those older FD lenses, though, man, I mean, if you really just need super, super crazy telephoto reach, you can find some cheap
it'd
ones.
be nice for like some portraits and stuff like that. So.
Well, or have you looked at those wacky circle, like bokeh lenses, the mirror ones?
Yeah. No, I wasn't thrilled with them. It wasn't my
Oh.
style.
I just want to take pictures of water with like donut bokeh all over it.
Donut book. In any case, I've got to get going and get
All
back
right.
on some of this work.
That was the extra bit you guys get when you watch the video version. Thanks, Devin, as always, and we'll see you guys next time.